Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas and this is how to create a hyper-casual game in Unity, and welcome to episode 11. In this tutorial we're going to create a little splash as an intro to our game and a very simple menu which you would just basically tap to start the game. Don't forget, click the subscribe button and click on that bell icon as well to stay up to date with every tutorial still to come in the series and everything else on game development on my channel. And if you've enjoyed this series so far, please feel free to check me out on Patreon or YouTube memberships where you'll learn things like early access, exclusive content, project files, and so much more. With that in mind, let's get to work. So what we're basically going to end up doing in this tutorial is creating something called sequence of events. And creating the sequence of events means that from the instant when the app is started up until the point that we have created so far. So we're going to create that sequence via a script. So there's a couple of things we need to get in place first. And the first thing we're going to do is that little splash. So what we're going to have is like a little white screen when the app loads with our game company logo and then goes into the menu for the game. So usually in a lot of games you would have separate scenes for this. However, we want load time to be reduced somewhat more than you would find in, for example, PC games or console games, although these days I guess that doesn't really matter. But what we're going to do is we're going to keep everything contained in one single scene. So to do that, we are going to go to Game Object, let's go to UI, and let's go to Raw Image. So I want my splash to be completely white with my logo fading in and then fading out after a second or two. So let's use the anchor and stretch this across the entire canvas, and let's zero everything out. Now, at the moment, I'd like this to be on top because I want this to overlay pretty much everything right now. And I'm just going to rename this raw image to Splash Background. So this is basically what we're going to see when we start the app. Next thing, I want to bring in another image, which is going to be my logo. So Game Object, UI, and raw image once again, and let's have this center and let's zero that position out so it's always center. Now I'm going to right click, create a folder, and this is specifically going to be for textures. Now we haven't really dealt much with textures, which is a bit weird considering we're 11 tutorials in, but we've not really needed textures at this point. So a texture is basically an image that can be applied to either, for example here, a raw image, or perhaps a material. For now, I'm going to drag and drop this. Obviously, you could use a text element if you wanted to and just type the text in. It's entirely up to you. Like I say, if you've got a logo for who you are, that's all good and well. So I'm going to drag and drop this over here and display it there. And let's just increase the size of this a little bit. So let's have the width as 300. And yeah, I think that'll do. So this is what it's going to look like when we start. Now, we're going to use some animation here to make this fade in and then fade out. So firstly, what we're going to do is set the color and the alpha to 0. So it basically looks like it's disappeared. Next thing, let's go into the UI folder. We're going in here just to be ready for when we create the script, that is, by the way. And we need to get the animation tab. And if you don't already have it up here, then I'm sure I mentioned this earlier. You can click the little dots there, click on Add Tab and Animation. Now, I'm actually going to bring my animation tab down here, I think. So let's bring it down here next to the profiler. And now let's click on the raw image, right click and rename. And let's call it Main Logo. And we basically want to fade in and fade out. So actually, now I think about it, we probably should have created a separate folder for the animations rather than be ready in the scripts folder. So let's go back to our project window, assets, folder, animations. And I think at this point I should probably think of a good name for this game. So I'm going to create another folder and I am going to call this game Orb. In fact, Orb Catch Master. That's what we're going to call it. You can call it whatever you want, but for now, for all intents and purposes, it's called that. So let's be in that folder, and then let's click on our main logo again, go to animation, and now we need to click on create. And we'll have this called logo fading. Now you'll be presented with this here. Looks a bit strange, but it's actually very easy to use. So firstly, you'll want to click the record button right there. That means we are starting the animation. Now we are frame 0. So we need to basically set our initial frame, what we want this to be at the very start of the animation. And we want it to be exactly what it is now, which is at 0 for the alpha, because that's the only thing we're going to change here. So let's just wiggle that around a bit so we can see it fading and then set it to 0. You'll know you've done it right because you'll set the keyframe there with the little squares or diamonds or rhomb, whatever, the little dots. So we're going to do this over the course of half a second. It'll fade in. Now we do this in 60 frames a second. So therefore, half a second would be the 30th frame. Perfect. So by the 30th frame, we want the alpha to be completely full. So that means we see it, and we've set that frame there. So then a second later, we want to start fading out again. We want this to last a second. So that means that by frame 90, we need to set our color still as 255. And I'll show you how that works and why we're not fading out just yet. So make sure you wiggle that around a bit and then set it as 255 on frame 90. Now, if we go along, we can see here that there is that frame. If we'd have had that as the fade out there, that would have gradually faded out rather than stay completely solid. So the next thing we need to do is by the 120th frame, we need it to fade out completely. So we set the alpha back to 0. Once we've done that, we can press the record button again to stop that. So that is now been completely animated. And if we go to our project window, and down here you'll see a couple of different things here. This one here is basically what controls the animation. And this one is the animation itself. Now on here, we need to untick loop time so that it only plays the animation once. So let's quickly check that out and see if it works as intended. Seems okay, I think. So the reason it looks like it jumps into that is just because it's taken a half a second for Unity to kind of get in place. We'll adjust that when we create that sequence. So next thing we're going to do is let's create some text to say what the game is and tap anywhere to begin. So let's take, in fact, we'll just go game object, go UI and go to text. And we'll have it central and 0 them out. And our game was called Orb Catch Master, wasn't it? So Orb Catch Master. And we will change our font to the one we imported last tutorial. I'm going to set it absolutely black. It's kind of a very dark grey, the colour at the moment. I want it completely black. And I'm going to increase the font size to maybe 40. And now we just need to adjust that size using the rect tool there. So we can adjust that way and that way. I think 40 might be a little bit too big, so let's have 36. Still too big. Okay, 34. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to have that right there. And I'm going to create another one. So I'm going to hold control and press D on that same one. And then I'm going to bring it down. Decrease the font size a little bit more. So let's have that as 26. And we'll have tap anywhere to begin. And I'm actually going to central that alignment and probably turn it a little bit grey. Again, we're going for simplicity here. It's entirely up to you what you do with all of this. There's no right or wrong way. So let's have this text renamed as game logo. Let me sort the caps out there. Game logo. And this one will be tap to begin. So I'm hoping by now you guys can see how this sequence of events is actually working. So the idea is that we are going to basically make these disappear and make this white screen fade into the game. So let's now click on the splash background. And now we want to click on animation again because we're going to create an animation for this splash background. So click on create. And in the same folder, that animations and orb catch master, we'll have splash fade out. Now we need to remember the name of that animation, splash fade out. It'll come in useful later on this tutorial. So once again, let's press that record button and set our first keyframe. So that means we want the alpha as completely on, which is 255. And I want it to fade out over the course of a second. So by the 60th frame, we want the alpha to be completely off, which is 0. And then stop the record button. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than what we did with the main logo. So if we go to the orb catch master animations and click on splash fade, we want to untick loop time. However, we now need to do a little bit more than what we did last time. So on the splash background, you'll see the controller on the animator component says splash background. Double click on that. And that will open up this animator profile. And we need to create an empty animation because we only want to play this animation via script rather than straight away. So right click, create state, empty. And on that new state, right click and set as default layer state. So now that animation that we created won't play. It will still exist, but it won't play. So if we press play on our game now, we should be able to see still all good and well. So everything is technically working as intended, as we have created. And what we're going to do now is we are going to create a script which allows us to control everything that is going on. In fact, now I think about it, before we do that, we should probably... now, do you know what? I think we might run out of time. This has dragged on a bit too long already, to be honest. We'll start creating that sequence of events. So let's go to our UI folder in the scripts. Right click, create, C# script. And we'll have this as, in fact, I'm going to say OCM, short for Orb Catch Manager, begins. So let's open that up in Visual Studio. So all of this will eventually make sense to you. So once we've got the script open, there are a couple of things that we're going to need to work with. So firstly, we need to set the variables that we're going to use here. The first one is going to be the main logo. So let's have public game object main logo, semicolon. The next one is going to be those two text images, so the orb catch master and the tap anywhere to begin. So public game object, and we'll do that as an array, just because we can. So the double square bracket there, and we'll call this menu text semicolon. The next one is going to be the white background. So public game object, and we'll call this splash background semicolon. And let me think, what else do we need to deal with here? 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've got everything there. Now what I am going to do is I am going to turn off a couple of things here. So on audio in the main camera, let's turn off BGM. So we are going to need that as a variable in here to prepare for the future. So public game object BGM semicolon. And what else do we have here? We have a couple of other things within the canvas that we need to deal with as well. And we are gonna have, let me think, what do we actually need? Because if we press play now, what is going to happen? So we're not visually going to be able to see anything. So we do need to turn off in the global scripts the orb generate. So we're going to need public game object, and we'll call this global scripts, semicolon. Now, this is going to start getting a little bit complicated, but I'll do my best to explain what exactly is going on here. So, we are going to need to use a coroutine with this. And I'm going to get rid of the update method and the annotations because we do not need them. And we're going to start with enumerator. And we'll call this startup game, open close bracket and open curly bracket. So first things first, I want to yield, return new, wait for seconds, and we'll wait for just 1 second to allow the game time to kind of start up. After that, what we'll do is we will turn the main logo on. So firstly, let's turn it off in the inspector panel, and then let's turn it on via the script. So main logo dot set active true semicolon. Now that runs for roughly 2 seconds. So we're going to wait for, let's say, 2.5 seconds, so 2.5 F. After that, we will turn it off. So main logo dot set active false semicolon. Next thing we need to do is put those two menu texts on. So menu text and in square brackets 0 dot set active true semicolon, and then same again for number 1 in that. So menu text and in square brackets 1 dot set active true semicolon. So they are now active and on, and I'm going to save that script. So the next part of this is all going to be done via a UI button. So let's check that this sequence of events is working as intended. So we're going to need to turn off the game logo and tap to begin in the inspector panel as well. So we just have that white screen again. Now, let's drag and drop the OCM begin script onto global scripts. And I'm going to untick orb generate because we don't want it to start generating right now. And I'm also going to untick timer because once again, we don't need it active right now. So where do we go from here? Well, we just need to apply these variables. So in the menu text, let's set the size as 2. And then main logo, let's attach to the first variable. And game logo. And then tap to begin. Splash background. BGM. And finally, global scripts, which is itself theoretically. So, we don't technically need to do that, but I guess it doesn't really matter at this point. So now when we press play, what should happen is we should have our logo fade in, fade out, and then our menu appear. So let's check this out. Do you know what? I'm sat there thinking, why isn't this working? What didn't we do, guys? If you realize what we haven't done, put it in the comments now and tell me, Jimmy, you're a fool. It's not going to work because we didn't start the coroutine, did we? Start coroutine, and in brackets, start up game, close bracket semicolon, and save. So just to kind of reiterate, I know we haven't used a couple of those variables just yet. Like I said, they are going to be useful for the next part of what we're creating here, but we're starting to create that sequence of events now. There we go. So far, so good. Orb Master, Orb Catch Master, I should say. Tap anywhere to begin. If we turn our canvas off in the inspector panel, you can see that nothing is there just yet because we've turned everything off. Yes, that's still moving. However, what we're going to plan to do in the next tutorial is we are going to have that tap anywhere to begin active. So as then we can carry on with the sequence of events and then basically make the game start up. And from there, that's when we'll do after what happens with the timer. So then we can link everything together and get all this section done. So guys, until that next tutorial, thank you very much for watching.